We have breaking news on the Senate Republican leader race. It is John Thune of South Dakota. Manu, take it away.
Yeah, the new Senate Majority Leader, Senator John Thune, elected first in 2004, has worked his way up the rungs of Republican leadership, has been a committee chairman, was now the current Republican whip, has now ascended from the number 2 spot to the number 1. He will be the Republican leader, the majority leader, the person who is in charge of setting the agenda on the floor of the Senate. One of the most consequential jobs in Washington. Will have to work with the incoming Republican White House and incoming Republican president to get this agenda through. Now, this is a vote just wrapped behind closed doors, according to multiple sources, that John Thune edged out John Cornyn on a vote of 29 to 24. Cornyn was a former Republican whip, a 2-time member of the Senate GOP campaign chairman. This campaign had taken shape behind the scenes for about 9 months in the aftermath of Mitch McConnell making that decision not to run again for Republican leader. McConnell has dominated the Senate GOP for 18 years, the longest serving Senate party leader in history, but decided it was time for him to step aside. And now we're seeing a new generation of sorts. John Thune is 63 years old. He has served in the Senate since 2005. His politics are much more in the mainstream of GOP orthodoxy. He'll have to figure out a way to work with Donald Trump. Sometimes they have not always been in line. In fact, in the aftermath of that Access Hollywood tape in 2016, he called on Trump to drop out of the presidential race. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, he thought the election should not be overturned. He criticized Donald Trump as well and supported Tim Scott in the Republican presidential primary. But Thune, over the last several months, has endorsed Donald Trump, has gone on the Trump train of sorts. They've been in frequent communication, I've told, at least he and his team, over the last several months to try to bolster that relationship. And Trump himself decided to stay neutral in this race, perhaps recognizing that even though Thune may not be in line with some of the others who are running, particularly Senator Rick Scott, who lost in the first round of balloting, that decided to stay out because this race could have gone any which way. And oftentimes, Dana, as you know, these races come down to relationships. They come down to commitments they have made to these members, committee assignments that they may promise, fundraising and the like. So there are lots of different reasons for people to vote a certain way. But this momentous decision by the Senate GOP picking John Thune as the next Republican leader, the majority leader, someone who will decide the party's strategy for the years ahead. Dana?
Yeah, really interesting development. Also, Manu, only in the United States Senate is 63 the young generation. Thank you so much for that.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
With me to discuss all of this breaking news, CNN's Jeff Zeleny, the Washington Post's Leanne Caldwell, and CNN's Phil Mattingly. Lucky to have people who have spent a lot of time walking those halls. And the fact that it's Thune, the fact that it is, I'll start with you, Phil Mattingly, that he is somebody who is Mitch McConnell's deputy. And Mitch McConnell kind of notoriously kept his own counsel, and it's not necessarily true that, like, I would call John Thune his protege, but he certainly was somebody who was the number 2 to McConnell for several years. And as Manu just said, not historically a Trump fan all the time.
Look, the Senate Republican Conference of 2024 is very different than the Senate Republican Conference of 2017 when Donald Trump last came to Washington. It is much more MAGA, it is much more Trump acolytes, it is many more people who owe Trump at least some credit for their seats. John Thune's not one of them. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't support Trump, particularly you think about the policy issues that Trump wants to focus on in the start of this term. On tax policy, Thune is always a player on tax policy from the 2017 rewrite. On immigration, they're aligned. But he is not an acolyte, and he is not somebody who came up or owes Donald Trump his career or his pathway to Washington. I think what's most telling about this is we all try and get our heads around what Trump's Washington is now and what it will look like in a couple of months. Is secret ballots matter? And the Senate is still the Senate. Now, the Senate is different than 2017 in terms of the makeup of the Senate Republican Conference, but it is still a chamber that appreciates its independence. It is still a place where there are a lot of lawmakers, and you and all of us can name probably 8 to 10 off the top of our heads, even in the Republican Conference, who you get crosswise with them or their committees or their legislative priorities, and there are going to be issues. And I think the import of this moment is where the House, as we saw this morning, is going to be very much I think it was Troy Niels who said, if Donald Trump tells us to jump, we say how high and then keep waiting for more instructions. The Senate is not going to be as compliant necessarily, and it's going to be a really important working relationship to develop in the months ahead.
Jeff, I spoke with a Senate Republican this morning who said that the phone in his office was ringing off the hook with people who were listening to Tucker Carlson and saying, do not vote for the rhinos, John Cornyn or John Thune, because they had deigned to, in some way, shape, or form, certainly more of Thune than Cornyn, criticize Donald Trump at various times over the years. And the fact that John Thune won, and Rick Scott in particular, who was the favorite of Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk and all the people who have been hanging out at Mar-a-Lago, even if it's not Trump himself, only got 13 votes in that secret ballot. What does that tell you?
It's a reminder, as Phil was saying, that the Senate is probably the last place that still has some vestiges of the past where personal relationships matter, where there is more of a sense of a decorum, and people are not following the rules and instructions of what folks online are saying, and it backfired. I was talking to a Republican advisor yesterday who said that his boss was furious at the fact that there was this online sort of outrage telling them who to vote for the majority leader position. John Thune has very deep relationships. This was a vote for John Thune. This was not a vote against Rick Scott. This was a vote for John Thune. And I'm thinking back to a conversation I had with him the Friday before the election. He was in Wisconsin. He had been on the road all week. He was campaigning all week, and obviously they lost that Wisconsin seat. But he has personal relationships with all the people he ran with. But he's probably the least Trumpy of all of them, and he's much more in the mold of Mitch McConnell now. He has a very tough job ahead of him now, dealing with the White House and the very slim Republican majority in the House.
Kind of ironic that he is going to be the Senate Majority Leader. I remember covering the Hill when he, as a House member, ran against the then Senate Democratic leader, Tom Daschle,
Right.
and beat him. And that was a really big deal. And now he's taken that very job.
Yeah, it was a huge deal. Also, the reason Senator Thune ran for re-election 2 years ago is because of the possibility that he was going to be Senate Republican leader. He did not want to run for re-election. He was worried about Trump's influence in a Republican primary. And so this is good news for John Thune personally. I'm sure he's happy because he did decide to run for re-election and it wasn't for naught. But, you know, senators also remember Rick Scott, and they're still very angry about how he ran the NRSC in 2022. They did not win back the majority, and that's a big reason why Rick Scott is not the most popular senator, despite what the MAGA crowd was thinking. And so I think the most important thing that you said is it was a secret ballot. I am very skeptical that they are going to buck Trump and MAGA on anything that is public. But for now, they don't have to tell anyone their votes.
One, that's critical. And just one other quick thing. Trump stayed out of this. He did not. His minions and supporters and allies and Elon Musk all jumped in and tried to shape this one way or the other. Trump did not. And that, I think, I don't know the rationale, but it shows a level of understanding in terms of where this may have gone, or the fact he might have been on the losing end if he went against Thune. That is a different level of understanding of this place than he had in 2017.
Yeah, I was told this morning he didn't want it to blow up in his face, and
Yeah.
he was right.